you for joining us today and participating in the Los Angeles Chapter's Conversations, Grammys, Bridges the Gaps. I am Kiana Conley. I am your Executive Director of the Los Angeles Chapter, and it is my pleasure on behalf of our Los Angeles Chapter Board Committees to welcome you today to this amazing new series where we, all of us as the Grammy family, talk about the things that you've been talking about in your studios, the things you've been emailing about to your friends, the topics you've been seeing scrolling on your feeds, like what's going on with the state of women and non-binary representation amongst producers and engineers.
Thanks so much, Kiana, and thank you, all of you, for being here, all of us having this amazing conversation. I think it was perfect for us to start with that amazing bio. It's not long. It's all well-deserved that we list down all these amazing achievements about each of us, just because it really explains how much amazing talent is out there that are women and non-binary in the music industry. So let me start by saying that I love that we all come from different backgrounds, but we're all here in LA, just kicking butt and doing what we're doing. And even with our differences, we have this shared lived experience of being women. And I'd love to hear from each of you a memorable experience of your journey as a producer and engineer that's rooted in being a woman in the music industry. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. How about we start with Lynn?
Thanks, Jet. So good to be here with everyone today and with many friends here also. I think first and foremost is actually the support that I have had from my male mentors in terms of starting out and those handful of engineers or producers that saw me. Like they just straight away went, okay, I want to invest in you, I want to support you. Most memorably stands out as Nico Bolas. Who I met many years, and I'm sure a lot of us know here. He just, the very first time I met him, I spend 5 minutes with him and it rearranges my molecules in terms of like, I spend the next 6 months or a year kind of thinking about something or looking at something in a different way. So when I first moved to Los Angeles 23 years ago, I was also hired at a studio by a great engineer and producer called Brian Reeves, who had done a lot of work in the 80s with a lot of the famous soundtracks like Footloose and things like that, The Breakfast Club. And he, again, similarly saw me and saw my passion for this and then invested time in teaching me and supporting me and giving me opportunities. And that has kind of led on with the likes of kind of Darryl Brown, with Leanne Rimes, who is a wonderful friend. And again, I just feel like it's those people who saw me. And I'm mentioning the men first because it is, it does exist that we do find support, and I have been lucky in those ways. And even people like Jeff Greenberg, who was the one who encouraged me to run for the LA chapter board in the first place. So that's my first thought is actually of the men who have really supported me and been such an ally.
Wow, that's amazing. And to think 20 years ago, right? And you're still good friends with each of them. It's amazing how relationship is a big part of our journey in this industry.
Absolutely.
How about you, Jess?
First of all, thank you for having me here. And Lynn, I'm so glad you went first because it made me think back. And if I'm honest, it was the same thing. For me, it was Jeff Trott. He wrote most of the Sheryl Crow hits, you probably know. He toured with Wire Train, Tears for Fears. I was the only woman in 2 floors of all touring musicians at Hollywood Sound. And they invited me into that studio. And that was a really huge deal. So, being treated like one of the guys, but also from people who were touring. There was the guys from Velvet Revolver, Porno for Pyros, like the MD for Sarah McLachlan. We had Damien Rice's piano in the main room. As a touring folk singer-songwriter, for me to be invited into that space when I moved out of being a singer-songwriter into producing was huge. I was around people that respected the level of guitar that I played, keys that I played, but also mentored me on how to record live instruments from the records that I grew up listening to. So I'm glad you set the tone with that. I will also add, because Alana's on this panel as well, being a woman years later, finding Alana, like we were part of we were friends for years and we were part of the same friend group. And we had like sister companies where she had a lot of the DreamWorks and the Nickelodeon, I had a lot of Hasbro shows. And we made a huge effort to trade work back and forth, but then we also would find other women and say, like, let's give this writer a shot, this producer a shot. Hey, I found this singer, but she also comps vocals. So that, that parallel of like, but it did start with Jeff. Jeff, they definitely made an effort to bring me into that fold. And then years later, it's like you pay it forward with
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because actually Alana has, in the last few years suggested me and gotten me quite a handful of projects, so yeah, it is that thing of putting, in latter years, us being able to hold each other up and
Yeah,
put
when
each
you
other
have the
forward.
work, then turning around and saying like, okay, now I get to choose who I'm going to fill my studio with, and what does that look like?
100%. It's really like advocacy. Once like the good karma is received by you, you just pass it on, and it really helps the industry. That's awesome. How about you, Ali?
Yeah, like I feel like even like Jess and Lynn were saying, like the support from men, like even like back in Colombia, that I started out actually as a session guitarist when I was like 13, so I was like very small, but like
You're a
I
child.
remember I remember like it was so important to me to have like that support from, it was like Juanes guitarists in the moment that they saw the talent, and they even brought me into the studio and they were like, you should be recording guitars here. So I really appreciate that because they already like opened that door for me. And yeah, I was like recording guitars, playing like in bands in my teenage years. And even after that, I got to work with Stefan Galfas. He's a producer for like Kool and the Gang and like Meatloaf and Cher. And I remember he was also like kind of like telling me like you should go into production, like you have like great ideas, great taste. That was like before I actually started to produce music. And I started out like 11 years ago to kind of like learn to produce in Pro Tools and everything. And I would send him like my productions and just to kind of like let me know like what you think of the mix, the master. And I love that he always gave me like the feedback that I was asking for. So I think like that was kind of like so important to me to even have like that support from him to know like, okay, like I'm getting like some guidance in that way. And then like, yeah, like people I've met on the way, like even like Sebastian Chris here in LA when I moved here 5 years ago, that I actually, like he reached out to me because he was like, yeah, everybody's telling me to work with you. So like, let's get to work. And I was like, okay, like, yeah, like I'll do whatever, literally whatever like you bring on my plate. Like I'm just like open to do it. And I'm glad that like he trusted in my talent and he wasn't asking me like to prove myself, which kind of like still happens to this day. So it was like, I love like seeing like that support from men like that. And also from women peers, like even like Diana Rodriguez. I met her like 7 years ago. And I'm so glad that I ended up working with one of her artists, like now, with Francisca Valenzuela, that you also worked in that album. But it was like, yeah, like kind of like 7 years later, but like she saw like the flame 7 years ago. So it's like, it's always like a matter of time to like just like trust the process, like keep building like the relationships and kind of like don't feel like you need to rush things or like it's kind of like everything will happen in its moment and on when the timing is right. Like just keep kind of like working on your craft and like also like never abandoning like that faith on yourself too, I feel.
Agreed, 100%. As like what you said about encouragement from the veterans in this industry is very crucial, especially growing up, and we don't see a lot of people like us like being represented out in the commercial media. So to get that reassurance and encouragement from peers that we're meant to be here and just keep pushing you, I think that's very important. Let's move on to Alana. It's so cool that you guys have worked for so long. So
yeah.
tell
Well,
me
no,
more.
and my story involves Jess too, actually. But I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to the question because one of the most memorable experiences as a woman producer and engineer was when Jess asked me to host a Sona songwriter panel. And I was like, okay, cool, but I want to do it like this. I want it to feature women, queer people, people of color, and that's it. And she was like, cool, do it. And most of the people ended up being female songwriters who also are producers and engineers, right? I mean, I think that well, I'm going to get into that in a minute, but... and the thing that struck me the most was when 2 or 3 of them ended up saying afterwards, during the conversation moment, oh, when I saw Alana doing this at the studio, I was like, oh, maybe I can do that. Or when I was just composing, and then Alana showed me like, oh, you can do this. And I didn't know. I literally had no idea that I had impacted these people in that way because they never told me. It wasn't obvious. But that's exactly why representation is so important. Because when you see a woman behind the desk, you go, oh, wait, I can do that. It becomes visible to you. It becomes a position that's visible. So super important.
Exactly. And to think that it shouldn't be that case to begin with, where people would think that they cannot or they're not capable of those opportunities, because everyone is capable and we can all do that. So even just a small example of seeing themselves through us, through the women and non-binary folks in the industry, speaks volumes. And continuing on to that about like surprises, things that are like unexpected in the music industry. How about let's talk about the common myths or misconceptions about being women in the music industry. I'll give one example. There was one person recently who approached me saying, "Why are there no women producers and engineers?" I think that's one of like the biggest misunderstandings, because data may say that there's not a lot of women in hit records. That doesn't mean that there's no women producer and engineer out there. I wonder what your thoughts are on this one. I'll have you guys choose who to speak first.
I mean, I have a funny example of a misconception. When I go into Guitar Center to buy something I want, headphones, the particular headphones I happen to like, they're always like, "Oh, you sure you want that? There's like a cheaper one over here." I mean, these are professional headphones. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure, thanks."
Yeah, I remember that used to happen at Guitar Center all the time. They'd be like, "Well, you don't need those. You don't need those monitors." And you're like, "What?" They're like, "These speakers are cool." I'm like, "No, I need monitors." And like, "No, you're just playing." They couldn't fathom.
yeah,
I mean, I did a writer in the round in Nashville. I don't know how many of you know Marty Dodson. Marty's another incredible advocate, incredible songwriter in Nashville. And I'd gone down there to do some writing with him, and he asked me to play a writer in the round at the Red Robin. And I'm walking towards the stage. And Marty plays guitar, but like I was touring as a guitar player. And someone stops me from one of the PROs. I won't call them out, but they go, "Marty, why are you letting this little lady hold your guitar for you? That's really rude." And we get on stage, and meanwhile, I'm like, at this time it's like 15 years ago, so I'm a lot younger, and I'm just like, it's embarrassing. And I get on stage, and I didn't realize how incensed he was. Like, if any of you see Marty Dodson stuff, he's such an advocate for like all things leveling life and just, advocacy. But I had just met him, and we get on stage, and he goes, "Someone asked me why she was holding my guitar." He goes, and, not knowing she's 10 times the guitar player I'll ever be. He goes, "And I know you're here to see me, but Jess, will you kick off the night?" And it was such a like,
Hell yeah.
But you need people like that, because I wouldn't have said anything. I would have been like, you know what, when they see me play, they're going to be like, oh, like, and that's another thing. I get off stage and people go, you actually play the guitar.
That happens.
Yeah, right? You get off and they're like, "Oh my God, you really play." And you're like, "What did you think I did?"
Yeah, it's so funny because I feel like I still sometimes get it like, "Oh, like you actually played that guitar on the song," and I'm like, I've been playing for like 26 years, but like, yeah, like it's kind of like I need to like play like videos and everything for people to actually believe. But I feel like, yeah, maybe like those misconceptions are kind of like attached to like, yeah, like what a woman should be like doing. And even like it does happen to me, like whenever I'm like going into a session, they say like I'm either like the singer, also because of the way that I dress and everything, or like just gonna be writing there. But it's like, no, I'm also like gonna be like producing here, or kind of like doing more, like even, yeah, kind of like bringing out much more, like playing guitar, bass, I don't know, like whatever, like you guys like put me like to play here. But I feel like it's kind of like that stereotype that is kind of like outside of like, oh, like a girl in the studio is supposed to do this or that.
I did blow a Guitar Center guy's mind once by going in and asking for a D-sub.
We're
to
going
D-sub
hard
center.
on Guitar Center.
Yeah. I went in and asked for a D-sub to D-sub connector, and he just kind of looked at me. I don't think he knew what it was. That was my favorite Guitar Center moment, because it was usually the opposite. I think my funniest studio moment in terms of misconception was I was tracking at Henson Studios, and Larry Klein was producing. I was engineering. And I was setting up in the morning, and the session players started to arrive, and a guy comes in and with his, I can't remember if it was the drummer or not, and he said, hey, could I get a Starbucks run rockin'? And I went, sure, no problem. Let me get the runner on that. I'm your engineer for the day. Nice to meet you. And just like watch him kind of, go pale but usually, I mean, there is that novelty moment where you get somebody going, oh wow, I've never worked with a woman before, and but then you start working, and then we start focusing on music, and kind of smooth things over.
Yeah, it's like understandable novelty can cause that, and at the end of the day, it's like the goal is that women and non-binary folks should not be novelty in the music industry. And I think one of the things to really combat that is to just us keep doing what we're doing and really showing them that we're equally as capable and could be even better.
Yeah, oh, you.
I was just going to say, and the visibility of our craft. We've been talking about this a lot, like to see our names with producer, writer, engineer, mixer underneath them, as opposed to more like women in it, like, so it's been very important up till now to have those conversations and acknowledge kind of the imbalances, but now it's really craft first. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and then it just normalizes, and people like, when I was I'm 45, so when I was starting out, the only people I knew of were Trina Schumacher, Leslie Ann Jones, and Sylvia Massey. Three people, and it wasn't going to stop me because I love this too much, but at the same time, I've met a lot of women since who it did stop them because they didn't see it, or they were verbally told it's not a profession for women, so in a way, it's kind of, that's why it's so important for everything that we're doing to help normalize things.
Yeah, just do what we're doing. Alana?
And just to tag on to what Lynn is saying, 100%, I think it's really also important for all the artists out there who are recording themselves and who are mixing their own records and producing their own records to start identifying as producers and engineers as well. I remember we were on a Women in the Mix Zoom, and one of the singer-songwriters was like, well, she records all her own records. She produces all her own records. And she was like, well, she was embarrassed to say she was a producer engineer. She didn't feel like she had earned it yet. But guess what? If you're doing it, you're doing it. Okay?
That's so true. And just to add to that too, there seems to be a lot of me encountering women and non-binary folks who kind of minimize what our skills are. And on the other side, there are also men who kind of hype up their own skill sets, but not really are fully capable of the things that they claim. So I think it's a good reminder for women to just be proud and own the things that we do. And
I fully agree, and that's actually something that's dawning on me almost more now, that sense of ownership of our experience and what we have to share and what we have to offer. I was speaking to a wonderful producer the other day, and I'm not going to remember her last name, but Kenya, who produced and won for New Age.
Kenya Audi.
Audi, yes, and won for New Age. And I had a conversation with her the other day, and I said, oh, Kenya, congratulations, and have you noticed a change since your nomination? And she went very quietly, well, actually, Lynn, it's my 8th Grammy, 6 of which are Latin, and 2 of which are American. And I said, all for production? And she said, yes, not all in production categories, but albums I produced. And I'm like, there's an 8-time Grammy-nominated winner in our midst. She's in the San Francisco chapter. My thought at the moment is we're already here. And like you said, we're working away. There does seem to be a threshold for us getting into those categories where the data is being pulled from, the sort of the label side. So there is definitely a barrier, but we are working away and we are badass.
Yeah, we're here and then just kicking butt.
Totally. And I was also going to say that like it's so important to kind of like have that acknowledgement and like recognition like from like the peers and kind of like the community in general, because as Jet was mentioning, like I do feel sometimes like the work men do kind of like gets much more attention, like even if like a woman did like an amazing job in production engineering and even like winning Grammys, it's kind of like it doesn't go like fully there to like the scope that somebody like a male that wins a Grammy and everything, like the amount of opportunities that come with that versus like for a woman. And I even remember like this album that we worked together, the Vida Tan Bonita of Francisca, that I co-produced with Sebastian. But I remember there was like an article in Rolling Stone and they just said like, oh, and it was like under the production of Sebastian Chris. And I was kind of like thinking like, like even like those things kind of like don't help because I was just erased from the production work of it.
Yes.
And then those media are asking like, oh, where are the women producers? But it's like, you erased me from that spot. So it's like, it's like those things that we kind of like still need to get like that kind of like recognition or like, like full like approval from like the whole community. And like on top of that, like getting paid and like hired basically to make the difference.
Exactly.
Well, I'm glad. I was gonna say, like, I'm glad you mentioned this whole thing because it is like having been in it as long as we've been in it. It is a perception switch, right? Like, I knew I had to be better than the people that were like coming up with me as a woman because you know what your people how people are going to look at you, like you're holding someone's guitar. Even when I had my studios, people would walk in and be like, whose studio is this? Like they couldn't, but you know that you internalize it. And I think if you get to a certain level, like, and that's the part that bums me out, like how many women who are really talented give up because they face that much pressure and they don't think that they can push past that or do it, or they don't realize how good they are because they're constantly being looked at like they're, you know, second class when it comes to the talent. But this is a mentality switch. Like I kind of, I'm in that boat too. Like the show I just did was nominated for 6 Emmys, and it took me like a week, thank you, to post it because I was like, you know, you can see, like, you know, and like then Alana and I wrote one of the songs in the episodes, and I executive music directed that series. And it's like, you think, like, you know, my assistant's the one that's like, put it up. And like, you know, and if I'm really honest, I put it up because I'm part of the queer community. So I was like, the queer community needs to see this show. It's so good. But like, what is that you're like, oh, I'm just gonna put my head down and do the next project. And that doesn't help other women.
You know what? That's 100% true. And that's why I made my Instagram unprivate, because it was private. And then I was like, you know what? I'm
Yes,
going to
Alana
start.
never shares her projects. She's just starting to. Like that credit list is like 1,000. Like,
Well, and the thing is, my IMDb is wrong. I was on this meeting the other day with NBC and well, I don't know. Anyway, I was on this meeting with some very influential women in film, TV, music, and they were like, "Oh, so the last thing you did was senior year, I guess, which came out like 2 years ago." I was like, "No, but I don't update my IMDb." Why don't we do that? I think that there's something, especially with what Ali was saying about the way we operate, that maybe the problem is that we're not chasing so hard the PR, the articles,
think
because we
big.
don't care as much, because it's not stoking the same thing. You know what I mean? I'm even noticing it on this panel. We're handing the conversation off to each other. If 2 people start speaking at the same time, oh, you. And this has happened the whole time. I was just on another panel with men, and that did not happen. They were amazing, and it was fine. There was a flow, but it just wasn't like, oh, you. So it's different. And Lynn and I speak about this all the time. That creates a different environment in the studio. That, in and of itself, creates a different vibe in the studio, especially if there's a female artist on the other side of the glass. That's it.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And also we started this conversation as well about being seen. Like if you want to light somebody up or open somebody up or drop their defenses or whatever it is, show them you're listening, make them feel seen, make them feel heard.
Advocate for each other.
It's a superpower. And in a way, and that is what gives us a little bit of an edge in the studio, because we are more wired to listen and observe. And my favorite, like somebody asked me one day, what's the best quality? Like what is the top quality of a great producer? And my answer, or a great leader, my answer is a great listener. Yeah. Like that's it. If you can't listen, if you're not a listener, you're not going to be remotely as good at whatever you're doing as if you are someone that can step back and listen and make space for people to step in as well. But I also agree in that I'm starting to have that same realization that I need to step into things myself, be a little bit more, be less humble, I guess. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the penny is dropping, you know, and so, yeah.
Like one of my really good friends, a Grammy winner, engineer, producer, we were talking about how we've been in this industry for a decade, but we keep thinking small. But I think we need to be hype women for ourselves. Think big and advocate for our peers. These women on this panel are all big advocates of each other, and we've all worked in some capacity with each other. Women are great hype women for others, but let's think and like hype ourselves. But it takes effort too.
But I think it's again ties into the being seen. Like since
Yes.
being on the LA Chapter Recording Academy board and being on the various committees, in particular the Peony Wing, has been meeting each other and coming together. Like Alana and Jess and I already knew each other, but there are also a lot of new friends now. And the more women and non-binary people that I meet, the more I feel seen, but like it's helping. It's a mirror. It's helping me see myself. It's helping me learn some of these lessons of kind of what is needed. But it's because, you know, through the boards and the committees, we've been brought together, and we're all doing a lot of conversations offline, like outside of the meetings. We're getting
Coffee
together,
shops.
coffee shops after our advisory council meetings,
that was fun.
and that's where I'm finding more kind of like a rejuvenation of the mission in a way, and kind of fire to keep going.
And it also reaffirms the reality that there are so many women out there, and it's a matter of just us connecting with each other, right? I believe we have a couple of questions lined up from the audience, but let me tie up our questions right now with, you've probably seen on the internet, like there are certain recent data that came out on the detailed statistics of the number of women in that have worked as producers, engineers, and hit records in various genres, and the lack of women and non-binary folks. So as members of the Recording Academy and as professionals in the music industry, what can we do to address this and really make space for more of us to be part of the table, part of the room?
Funny you should ask. We've been talking about just that. Lynn and I have been saying for a while that it's really important for us to be able to find each other. Not only for us to be able to find each other, but for other allies to be able to find us. How do I find a female vocal engineer? How do I find a female vocal producer? How do I find a female beat maker? How do I find all of these things to join my creative community? And a couple of exciting things are on the horizon. One is that JAXTA just started putting gender identity in their profiles. So now
That's
you can.
important.
It's important because there are some really amazing places where you can go, resources where you can go and find women producers and engineers, and She Is the Music is one of those. But the problem with that I personally had with She Is the Music is I was looking for somebody to help do vocal comping and tuning. And anybody can say, I do that. How do we know that they're going to be any good? I mean, you know, obviously I'm like filtering out for some sort of I'm reading what they're writing about how they use these programs, but I have to decode that, right? So there are now ways for us to start finding each other, and I'm hoping that we can make more efforts as the Recording Academy to bring that together for our community as well.
Crediting. Since you're talking about JAXTA, just credits is so crucial to this advocacy, and even making sure that if your name is not on the credits, fight for your credit to be there. It's very important.
But I also think, in addition to it, like, kind of, I was thinking about what you were saying, solving that problem of, like, at the end of the day, like, we have to deliver that song and it has to be good, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, another issue with crediting is who gets their name thrown on it that did nothing. Like, one of the series that I did for Pony Life, they gave the executive music director series to a guy who wasn't on a single email, who was a vocal producer, who barely did the theme, and then I actually pushed back with Hasbro, and all they did was take his name off of it. And I was like, that was my series. Like, I did all this. Like,
Where's my credit?
right.
Yeah.
So I think the tricky part is there's the crediting, but from a functional perspective as a producer, endorsements. Like, I would want to know, like, just because someone was on a project doesn't mean they didn't suck at it.
Yeah.
I mean, for lack of a better word, like, you may have had them on the project and you inherited them, or it was something political, or you tried them out and it wasn't great. So I think, like for me, endorsements, at least from the work perspective, if Alana tells me someone's good, I call them the next day for a project, you know, because I know the kind of work that Alana needs to produce. You know, Lynn tells me someone's good. Like, you know, it's like you have to establish that trust. So I think the crediting is important, but for me, like, I wouldn't hire someone off of credits because I know a lot of people who just got lucky in the room, and then I've hired them on a project, and I'm like, oh God, now what do we do?
So credits and word of mouth, and yet just endorsement from your
combo,
peers. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel it's also important to kind of like hold the people of power accountable, that they have kind of like the option to actually hire women and everything. Because in the end, what you were mentioning about this study that has the statistics, like all those hit songs are of artists signed to labels. So if those labels are always going like to the same people and kind of like, yeah, kind of not going out of that circle and not doing like an active work to actually go find these women that
It's not
are like
hard.
in all these databases. So yeah, just like hold those people like accountable and actually, yeah, like meet with them and show them like did you hire any women in the past year? No. If they don't say anything, okay, that's an answer too. It's kind of like to really show them like, yeah, this is how you're able like to fix this, like to really fix this and not just give us a platform, but actually like hire us and like pay us what we deserve.
100%.
And just the artists as well, like encouraging the artists, because it's really going to take that sense of the, you know, like a large artist going, I want to work with her. It happened to me when I was younger, where an artist who was signed to Hollywood Records, Sheila Nichols, turned to the A&R guy, John Linden, was like, I want to make this record with her co-producing. And thankfully, John went, yes, you know. And so it's like that sense of the artists as well, and encouraging them to seek us out. But again, we have to be visible and
Visibility.
searchable, discoverable.
So credits, endorsements, visibility, and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for having this conversation. Let's now go to the audience for their questions. I'm looking forward to hearing from our folks in the audience.
Great. First up, we have Esther Galvez.
Hey,
Esther.
Hi, I'm Esther. I'm a campus ambassador for Grammy U for Cal State Long Beach. And one of my questions is, what can music industry leaders and organizations do to promote greater diversity and inclusivity in production and engineering?
I mean, an easy one for me is I always tell people, look around the room, and if everyone looks like you, and that goes for anyone, like, you know, something's wrong. So like even, you know, if I have a whole women crew, but they're all white women like me, like I'm not trying hard enough. So I think, you know, I always try to get people to pledge that at least, you know, they make an effort to try out someone new on every project. At least that way it's a low risk and, you know, if you have a budget for it. But I think, you know, having people at our level on those projects give new people a chance, but also making sure that they're not sitting in rooms where everyone looks like you. That doesn't really change anything.
And I think it is shifting now with all the different reports, but like acknowledging that there is a problem, you know, to begin with, that can be difficult sometimes on some of our, you know, the different organizations or different meetings where you can see this kind of baffled look of why are we having this conversation? But then you see the data and you go, well, this is why, you know? So in a way, like actually sort of not being afraid to acknowledge that it is imbalanced. It's not a finger being pointed. It's traditionally the industry has been like this, and now it's making efforts to change internally, and that to have that reflect out. But it's almost like there are moments where you can see that people are like, what's the problem? Why are we talking about this again?
I got to think too. Now, something that Ali said really has been resonating with me the whole time, that she was erased from this Rolling Stone article. And then what Jess is talking about crediting and fighting for the credit. I think that something that the industry could do is make it a point to highlight women who are doing the work, because, right, we're here. And what if the labels were sending out, you know, everybody sends out the emails. You know, my agent, I've been doing a lot of awesome projects, and I'm never on that front page of their website, okay? Like, why? Oh, well, I also don't update my IMDb. I don't talk to them about it. We need to change that, how we're operating, and they need to start featuring us, because she needs a feature. Oh, look what
Rolling Stone.
100%. And that's the thing, because then her career, she gets another opportunity. And who's she going to bring into the room?
More women.
Another woman. Like, you know what I mean? So I think that that's really important, because as we rise, we can rise together. So our network needs to be strong internally. And then that's what we just got to do. I saw this GIF that it was just women pulling women up, and it was just this cycle over and over and over again. And I don't mean to exclude non-binary folks, like this too. Like, we need to all collaborate together.
Like all the minorities. And
Yeah.
I'm going to have to give a shout out to Jaxta, just because they are an official credit database, and they recently included a feature where you can filter for specific ethnicities and other factors that, you know, we want to expand in the music industry. So I mentioned there that I'm Southeast Asian, and now you can make an effort to look for those.
And multi-Grammy nominated.
Same with you. You have anything to say, Ali?
Yeah, no, I was actually kind of like gonna like say like everything that they've mentioned, and on top of that, like the importance to kind of like keep diversity like having like the room equal with like male participation too. Like I don't feel like it's about like you're raising like male and everything, because sometimes it's like, oh, like let's do like a session only women and everything women and that's it. But it's like no, like the point is to actually reach that equality, that it's like a diversified room where everybody's there because they're like the best at what they're doing. And yeah,
Exactly.
it doesn't matter if it's male, female, non-binary, like whatever it is, but it's kind of like a balance. So I feel like that's what we should like get to, basically.
And really all we're talking about is good communication in a studio. That's all it really actually boils down to. It's not so gender focused. It's almost like just asking for more listening, more space, more kind of sense of being seen and heard, like we were talking about. Like they're actually the skills that could be focused on in terms of helping dynamics with anyone, any gender, you know.
And what I want to add to that, and also tag on to what Ali was just saying, is I found myself in the studio with a female engineer, a female assistant, and a female orchestrator. There were literally no boys in the room. It wasn't by design. It wasn't. It was that I hired Emily Bear to orchestrate something, and then I hired Lynn to mix it. And the village supports female engineers, so their assistant was a female. And I looked around and I was like, that's cool.
That feels great.
You know, yeah, it was good.
There was just an ease to it. There was just an ease where, again,
And
like
it
all
should
we
be.
want to do is focus on the actual music.
And don't think for a second that this is like bad for business. It's good for business to have more voices and more representation in commercial, like mainstream media. Do we have any other questions?
We have time for one more question.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. It's been really fascinating getting to hear from all your experiences. My name is Hannah Abraham. I'm an artist, songwriter, producer, kind of all the things, based in LA, also alum of the USC Pop program, Fight On. But I wanted to know, I think a lot of the reason why men sometimes don't take women and non-binary producers seriously is because there's this expectation that we're expected to be like the face, like the beauty kind of the industry, and like we're just kind of sitting pretty or whatever. But I would love to know if through your experiences, have you chosen to fight against that and really let your work speak for itself without meeting those expectations, or do you maybe try to use that kind of to your advantage and play to that?
I feel it's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember once I had like a session where somebody told me that I didn't dress like a producer, and I was like, how is a producer like supposed to dress, like with Crocs and like a sweater and that's it? Because I was like, yeah, like this is like how I always wear. But like I feel like it's kind of like just embracing like who you are, and that's kind of like the best way to like also like let your work speak for itself. But don't kind of like pay attention to like that outer side of it, like to those things that in the end like won't define your talent, because everything's here like in your head. So it's like this is like what you're bringing to the studio and like what you're bringing into the table and everything. And yeah, this is just like your part of your personality. Like I'm always dressing like this, but yeah, it's like literally like I love like wearing makeup like in my everyday, like even if I'm just in my studio with my cat and that's it, it's like yeah, like I'm still like all fancy and everything. But it's because like I love it. But yeah, then there's people that like to be like super relaxed. It's kind of like part of your personality, but I feel like in the end it's like important to know like that won't define like your talent or like nothing, like because in the end, like as we are all saying here, it's about like the music. So I feel like that's the important thing, to kind of like always let like the music and your work like speak for itself. And yeah, like people eventually, if they're not saying it, like they'll start to see like yeah, like the right people will notice.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I'm embarrassed to admit this, but like, I mean, I'm gonna think back when I was. Now am I 100? I'm like 100 in LA years. Okay, so I'm very well preserved 100 in LA years. But I did change how I dressed back then. I used to dress like kind of similar to LA with like the dresses and the this and like way back in the day. And when I got in with that studio, I saw an opportunity and I started wearing T-shirts and no makeup. And I started hanging with the boys afterwards, and like, cause they were just people that love guitar. They didn't want the flash and like, and I wanted the respect. I wanted them to respect me as a guitar player. I didn't want them to see me as flashy. But the first day after I got my studio, they invited me in. I was that. The first day after, I remember like walking over and opening the doors, and I'm back in my dress with my like cleavage and my boots and like. like, and I remember some guys walking in with their guitars, and they were like looking at me like this, and they're like, oh, you know, Jeff was like, that's just Jess, don't pay her any mind. But like, I did tone it down. Again, this was like, 15, 20 years ago, so I would like to think now I wouldn't have done that, but.
Girl. I did the opposite. I mean, like, let me try and figure out, like, a PC way to say this. I have definitely used it a lot to my advantage in the sense that it can really inspire male artists sometimes to turn it on a little bit. And I don't know if I should be embarrassed about that. But I also, I mean, listen, I started working at a studio when I was 21 years old, and I was engineering, and I wore whatever I wanted. I mean, I don't know. I had long hair, nothing was on. Like, I stopped dressing like that like 3 years ago, okay? So, I mean, I don't know. So I never compromised in that way. I do think that it is sort of one of these moments where people are sometimes surprised, like, oh, like, oh, wow, she also knows what she's doing. I mean, so, but yes.
But yeah, the goal at the end of the day is that we get to be who we want to be or who we are without being judged regarding our skills.
Yeah, and I'm the opposite. I'm like super. This is about as dressed dressed
Same.
up as you will see me. This is
And
my
the thing
my
is,
game face.
we are diverse, and we shouldn't be defined by like how we look, and equate that with like our skills. So that's the goal, is to be who we are. But I think that's a great way to finish off our panel about just women in the mix and just giving space for women and non-binary folks in the music industry. Thank you so much, everyone. And this is just the beginning. It's an ongoing journey to make the music industry more welcoming for everyone. Thank you.